If you're a guitarist feeling stuck in your development, overwhelmed and confused by theory, not feeling confident in your practice or your performance, I'm certain that you're making at least 3 of these 3 mistakes, which are fatal. So if you don't know me, I'm Blake Hawley. I've helped a load of guitarists unlock comprehensive musical fluency. I've got a master's degree in jazz performance, well over 2 decades of experience as a full-time musician. My goal is to give you the benefit of all that experience so that you don't have to spend decades of your life trying to figure out something that can be understood in 6 months or less. Huge caveat though, which is you have to take the right steps in the right order, or it doesn't work. Then it will take you 10 years, 20 years maybe even. Some people don't even figure out over a whole lifetime. It being musical fluency, right? Compare music to a language and it's like, of course it shouldn't take more than 6 months if it's learned properly. It's way simpler than English. English has got like 3 million words or something like that. Man, you think about the 12-tone system, way smaller. So if people can learn languages in like 6 months or a year, you need to believe and see how easy it is to learn the language of music. You're either fluent or you're not. Once you cross over the threshold of fluency, which I'm saying shouldn't take you longer than 6 months if you follow the right steps in the right order, fluency will be the basis of all of your musical creations, right? Once you're finally fluent in the language of music, now you can create with coherence. No different than the author of a book writing novel after novel, using the same old language over and over again, but realizing boundless creativity within that language. That's exactly how music works. So these 3 fatal mistakes are avoiding that fundamental principle of fluency that is the almighty guiding principle of all musical practice. All of your technicality, all of your chops will emerge just from the fluency of music. The technique will always rise to meet the expanding vocabulary. Think about the technique I need to use my mouth properly, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, everyone's overthinking technique. It's effortless if you're focusing on expansive vocabulary. All right, so the first fatal mistake that you are making is you're focusing on scales instead of triads. Now, here's something you got to understand. Triads are the meat and potatoes, okay? You got nothing without your meat and potatoes, because any vegetables or spices or herbs that are served without the meat and potatoes of the meal are not going to be appreciated, okay? So think about it as your first side dish beyond the triad might be the side of vegetables. That could be thought of as the tetrachord, right? Tetrachord might be a good side of vegetables right there. Plenty to work with. I mean, you literally got a complete meal with just the tetrachord, right? Now you want to get some flavor, you want to get that spice going. It's only going to make sense in the context of that meal foundation, right? That protein, carbohydrate foundation. And where that whole metaphor breaks down is that, like, in music, you know, when you're playing chord changes that are moving by quickly, you rarely have time to play anything beyond the triad. And the substance of musical fluency is the ability to play through chord changes, the ability to articulate harmonic rhythms, right? That's the substance of musical fluency. So when it comes to being fluent in music, there's not very many situations where we're using that fully extended 7-note scale, unless the chord changes are moving by really slowly, like in a modal example. But the thing is you've already been playing modal, right? You're stuck in modal. You're sick of playing in modal. You want to start playing chord changes, right? You want to start moving to the harmonic rhythms. And this is like such a zeitgeist that's happening. I even saw Paul Davids like 2 days ago or 3 days ago released a video that was about triads, like as if like, was he not talking about that before? I know I've said it before. It's like, it feels like everyone's just figuring out triads, but it's just like, okay, where did I come to the triad realization? I came to it from Coltrane. When I wanted to learn the Coltrane tunes, I had to learn triads. That's the whole kicker of the whole operation. Learn the hardest tunes, which are arguably Coltrane. They're not hard once you figure them out. Nothing's hard once you figure anything out. All the tunes have a lesson, and the Coltrane tunes have the lesson of how to play a shitload of chord changes really fast. It teaches you that idea that you barely ever have time to play anything beyond the triad. If you actually want to play the harmonic rhythm in the tune and be precise in expressing that harmonic rhythm, which is literally the most important thing you do, because if you're not expressing the harmonic rhythm, you're not even playing the tune. So at fast tempos, goes back to the idea is triads are literally 90% minimum, 93.6% minimum. So with the analogy in music, it's like herbs and spices show up when there's less chord changes, right? So everything has its place, but it's becoming pretty obvious to me that all of you guitarists who are stuck out there, you're really stuck on the idea of not being able to play harmonic rhythms. Makes sense. I mean, that's the whole reason why jazz is a phenomenon and why people treat it as this like virtuosic music style. Well, because it teaches you the most important fundamental principle of music that very few people even unlock in a lifetime, because it's a mentality shift more than it is like a theory principle. It's just seeing music as a language instead of seeing it as whatever else people see it as, which is preventing them from just speaking the language of music fluently. Like maybe people are seeing it as like a sport, right? They're approaching it as like speed and technicality. And the reason that gets old so fast is because if all you focus on is speed and technicality, your vocabulary is tiny, and then you're sick of hearing yourself play the same thing over and over again. Yeah, you can play it at 6 trillion light years per second, but it's the same lick. It doesn't matter how fast you can play it. Too much of anything is a bad thing. Dosage makes all the difference. And also, when you're focusing on building, physicality instead of focus on building vocabulary, your technique is also very limited because your technique is specialized to this very narrow vocabulary, right? But if you focus on an expansive vocabulary, your technique is so much more adaptive, right? So like, dude, it's all ancient first principle stuff. Like I am seriously just channeling. And you're like, when is he going to get to number 2? Okay, I'll get to number 2, but it's clear, right? The first fatal mistake is you're focusing on the herbs and spices without the meat and potatoes. Terrible meal. Nobody wants to eat it. Not even you. So it's like, how do you even do this? How do you focus on triads instead of scales? And that brings me to the second fatal mistake that you're making in your practice. You're failing to use actual songs to contextualize the things that you're practicing. Right, so how do you learn triads? How do you master triads? You learn them in the context of the song. Now, if you try to learn scales in the context of a song, that's where it starts to make sense why we don't really talk about scales that much in the context of musical fluency. You're like, I don't even have time to play any scales right now. But because you may have overlooked the whole principle of using songs, the second fatal mistake, that's why it's so fatal. If you overlooked using songs to contextualize your practice, that's exactly why it's never occurred to you that the scales you're playing are not very useful. And then you go to the jam session, you're like, wow, I don't even know what I'm actually doing right now. Am I playing scales up and down? Am I playing scale patterns? What the hell is actually happening here, right? You didn't realize scales are just a huge red herring. And I'll tell you what they actually represent. And I've said this in videos before. Here's a little side note along the way. Scales are for constructing chords. When you are constructing chords, that's when you use scales. See how flawed everything is, like upside down? It's like scales should just be called chord construction material, because plenty of chords are going to have, flat 13s and sharp 9s, or major 7s and sharp 11s. Plenty of chords have that. Those are the fully extended scales. Those are when you have like 7-note scales used in context, is when they're actually used to play chord voicings. So the whole idea of scales is like they're for chords. And then you probably associated triads with chords, but it turns out triads are actually something you associate with melody. And this is all kind of coming from precedent, right? Like the precedent of bebop, or even go farther back, the precedent of, triadic voice leading from Bach invention type stuff. Bebop and Bach inventions, man. All right, third fatal mistake, right? This, you probably saw this coming 10 billion miles away. You're failing to develop rhythmically. You're spending too much time thinking about harmony, and you forgot all of your leverage exists in the rhythmic realm. It's only 12 notes, There's infinite rhythms. Now, for people who come new into my program, regardless of what level they're at, I always introduce this idea of displacement. So displacement can be thought of as a framework, right? We have these rhythmic frameworks that we like to think in. And like I said, rhythm is infinite, right? So we start to rein it in with these rhythmic frameworks. So I'll give you an example of displacement. So this presupposes a bunch of stuff right away. First of all, it presupposes that you can feel where the quarter note is. So when you start to practice rhythmically, one thing you can do right away is actually tap your foot. You could, of course, use the metronome. I always say that the metronome is kind of like a crutch. So if you do use it, try to like not use it very quickly. Like try to progress from using the metronome to actually just tapping your foot, or better yet, playing with people, right? That's when you really got to rely on your internal pulse. The metronome will lull you into a false sense of security because you're like, perfect, I can play with the metronome. And it's just like, yeah, but that's easy. Playing with people where they hide the beats, you know, that's a lot more difficult. And I made a whole video about this. Like, I'm not even going to go to... Actually, everything I'm talking about right now are in all my videos. Like, just go back and watch all my videos. I'm just summing up everything. But now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to zoom out. Get that big picture, then go back and watch my videos and see them in the context of the big picture. So big picture here is the 3 fatal mistakes. All the solutions that I brought up in this video are things I've talked about in all these other videos. All you have to do is just look through the titles. You'll see exactly what I mean. But I'll just show you displacement because it's classic. So what I'm gonna do is I'll play 16th notes, but I'll play them grouped in 5, right? So like you can 3, 4, da 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? See how that 5 is moving against, is displacing against the beat. I mean, first principle pot stirring of essential basics, foundational principles of creation. I'll put some notes to it, right? Now it's like, oh, okay, this is pretty easy, right? 3, 4. See that? Just peeling back the curtain just a little bit there, dude. But I have seriously brought that up in so many videos, it's insane. If that is tripping you out, watch this video specifically, because this is where I go all the way into that concept. But yeah, you see it. 3 fatal mistakes. Fatal! All right, so the final part of this video is basically how do you integrate this all into practice? Now that's where we talk about the Turbo Booster practice framework. I'll make a video on that eventually, but honestly, that's my signature power system for practice mastery. And if you really want to get that under your fingers, you got to go to Systems for Creation to check that out. So if you haven't even gotten fretboard mastery yet, definitely get that. Link in the description is for free. Also reach out to me on Instagram if you want to talk about doing some one-on-one. Otherwise, just join Systems for Creation, because that's literally where you can get the benefit of all my experience in less than 6 months. Come to class, 3 live classes per week, all recorded and archived. My full course library available to you in Systems for Creation. That's just my full offer. But if you're not ready for that, then you want to start with my intro package, which is a one-time payment instead of a recurring. And the intro package will get you 1,000% clear on the practice framework that you need to never make these mistakes again and start actually developing creatively as a musician and allowing your technique to follow that. That's it.